All right, I think we're going to get started. Just want to say a big welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Joanna Lidgate. I'm the CEO of the States United Democracy Center. We're a nonpartisan organization that helps state officials protect our democracy. And we're here today to talk about what's happening with the so-called audit in Maricopa County, Arizona. So this week things are on pause while graduation ceremonies take place in the Coliseum, but the chaos that this fraud has created continues. It's bad for election security, it's bad for voters, it's bad for our democracy. We all know that the 2020 election was free, fair, and secure. The results were certified, they were litigated, they were officially audited more than once in Arizona. So this is clearly not about election integrity. This is about casting doubt on the election process because you didn't like the outcome. The further we get into this, the more we understand just how unqualified and unprepared the cyber ninjas are to handle something as important as the ballots of millions of Arizona voters. And the more we learn about the fundraising schemes and the dark money that are bankrolling the operation, the more concerning it becomes. That's why you see leaders on both sides of the aisle who are speaking out against this fraud. In the past week alone, local leaders in Arizona, including Maricopa and the Board of Supervisors, have joined the chorus to say enough is enough. But I want to emphasize that this is not just about Arizona. As Secretary Hobbs has made clear, other states should be concerned about this circus coming to them. Today, we'll have another opportunity to hear from the election experts who were granted access to observe a few weeks ago, and we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. If you have a question, please put your name and outlet in the chat function, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. We'll unmute you when it's your turn and let you know to ask your question. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, the three elections experts who've been granted access to observe, Ryan Macias, Elizabeth Howard, and Jennifer Morrell. And I'd like to hand it over first to Secretary Hobbs. Gabby, should we start with Ryan or Jennifer? Do you want to give
the Secretary is having a technical issue. Let's kick it over to Jennifer or Ryan.
Great. Ryan, do you want to start?
Yep, I will go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for having us here today. As we reported last week, we observed several things that deviate wildly from best practices for election security and just general cybersecurity. Such as the Wi-Fi router, Wi-Fi capable router being connected to the servers, and then the power being shut off to the servers before they were able to back up the data, making it so that the cyber ninjas had to unload the servers from the secure trailer in order to run a backup over the weekend. Beyond these questionable practices, more security concerns became apparent. Some of this information we disclosed immediately, like when we learned that Ken Bennett is not the only person with access to the what we call the quarantine cage, where the secure data was being stored. We saw Randy Pullen, a well-known partisan activist, open and enter a ballot cage without Ken Bennett. This happened despite multiple assurances that Senate Liaison Bennett was the only person with access to the ballot cages. Additionally, we noted that there was a lock with a shared combination on at least one of the trucks storing the ballots, and that multiple people knew the access code to that combination. This was such an egregious security issue that an Arizona ranger hired for security purposes actually changed the lock himself after cyber ninjas dismissed this concern. Another concern of note is that the ballots are in non-temperature controlled trailers that are being housed in a warehouse with swamp coolers. This will introduce humidity into the storage facility, and that is problematic because humidity can obviously damage the ballots. With my past experience of certifying ballot printers and storage facilities, we always have a thermometer and hygrometer to measure the temperature and humidity as we walk in the room to determine whether or not they are safe and secure for ballots. Those are the issues that I have seen over the last 3 or 4 days of the audit. Obviously, there was a lot of other concerns that happened previous to that, but those are kind of the new things that we identified just between Wednesday and Friday of last week.
Thanks, Ryan. I think we're still waiting for the secretary. So Jennifer, do you want to give your thoughts?
You bet. Ryan did a fantastic job covering that. So I'll just add, as a reminder to everybody, for better or worse in this country, we conduct elections, we conduct audits, we conduct recounts in accordance with the laws of individual states and the rules set in those states. We don't get to just make those up as we go along. And even when we want to innovate or improve, we have to go through the process of passing a law and creating rules to carry out that law. So what's happening here is unprecedented. It's dangerous, not only in the fact that cyber ninjas is inexperienced, they're making things up as they go along, but what we observed is that every day, these procedures, these practices continue to change and evolve, and it's alarming. So with that, I'll hand it over back to you, Joanna.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Secretary Hobbs, we've heard from Ryan and Jennifer. Do you want to give your reflections before we turn it to Liz?
Sure. Thank you so much. And sorry about that. Thank you to all of you for joining us in another update on the Senate, the so-called audit. And thank you again, Joanna, States United, for helping to set up this briefing. I cannot express the appreciation I have for the people that have been serving as the experts and audit observers for this process. It's because of them that we're able to share these concerns that we have and validate the concerns. Their expertise and professionalism throughout the process has really been invaluable. Based in part on their observations, which you've already heard a little bit of, I am compelled to say again that what we're seeing happen is not an audit. It is a fundraising stunt. Just yesterday, Senate President Karen Fann said during a hearing that she's getting calls from legislators in other states wanting to know what they are doing and how they're doing it. And we know that there are efforts to bring this circus to other counties across the country. A similar attempt was derailed in Michigan yesterday when an Antrim County judge dismissed the last of the lawsuits stemming from conspiracy theories promoted during the election, potentially hopefully slowing the spread of these other sideshow audits. But as the situation here in Maricopa County becomes more bizarre, more and more leaders from all sides of the political spectrum are drawing the line on these antics that threaten the cornerstone of our democracy. And I'm really grateful for all of those voices. I've been raising red flags from the start of this process, and now we're finally seeing others, including the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, newly elected Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer, who very publicly denounced this exercise as a sham. We need more of this from our elected leaders. We need leaders willing to stand to protect our elections and stand up for our democracy. And this is what we're here for today. So again, I'm thankful for all of you here and thankful for Liz Howard, Jennifer Morrell, and Ryan Macias for being a part of this process. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Secretary. And Liz, anything you want to add based on your observations?
Yeah, just again, thanks so much to everyone for coming and for both of you for hosting this press conference. I mean, I think it's just, this week was again, just more and more that not only do the cyber ninjas and Wake TSI lack substantive elections and auditing experience, but they also lack critical skills in the area of their alleged competence, so IT and cyber, based on what you just heard from Ryan. And really, this is, again, just further evidence that these contractors are not up for the job, and the goal of this exercise is not related to election integrity. It's related to the big grift.
Thanks, Liz. So I think we want to save the bulk of our time for questions. I'm going to turn it over to Gabby Richards, who is going to moderate the Q&A.
Thank you, Joanna. We do have a few questions that have already come in. That said, just want to remind everyone on the line, if you have a question, please put your name and your outlet in the chat, and we will get to as many questions as possible. So our first question is from Ben Giles, or Giles, pardon me if I pronounced that wrong, from KJZZ. Ben, let me find you and unmute you. Ben, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, Ben Giles from KJZZ News. I had a question for Ryan. One of the things that came up in the kind of quasi-hearing that happened at the Senate yesterday was a pretty specific claim from the liaison, Ken Bennett, that you, Ryan, had tried to enter the Coliseum, perhaps under the guise of being a reporter. This was, from my understanding, before there was an agreement reached to allow Secretary Hobbs to send yourself and others in as observers. I was hoping you could address that, and if at any point you did try to get into the Coliseum before that agreement was reached.
Yeah, so this is just another false claim. What happened was the Thursday prior to us getting access, Ken Bennett and the Senate and Cyber Ninjas were doing a press briefing to show people the process that was going on. I had sent Ken and Senator Fan an email letting them know that I was going to be there. Senator Fan deferred it to Ken. I showed up. I was able to walk straight into the building because there was no credentialing or anything else. And then they made us exit and come back in through a separate door. When I came in the separate door, I spoke with the person doing the credentialing, and I let them know that I was an independent observer. And he actually has told them on multiple occasions that I said I was an independent observer, and he wrote down unaffiliated on the piece of paper. And so at no point did I ever purport to be media. Their own staff has said that the claim is false. And at that point, they actually went and got Ken, and Ken came over and he says, "Hey, Ryan, you're not media." And I said, "No, I'm not media. I am here as an independent observer." And he said, "Independent observers are not allowed here today. This is for media only. This is a press briefing." And I said, "Okay, thank you." And I left.
Okay, thank you for addressing that. And if I have time for one quick follow-up question, a couple of you mentioned that this is just a fundraising grift. I'll leave this open to the panel, but could somebody be a little bit more specific about what you're alleging there?
I'll jump in there. I think what we saw in the original scope of work and contract that was signed, where the cost to the Senate was $150,000, that was absolutely laughable, knowing what they were trying to attempt here. And then we saw immediately first OAN started doing a public call for funds for this exercise. And now they've set up a 501c4, which, as you know, is protected from any type of public disclosure. And so we will probably never know the cost or how much they're raising to do this. But the longer it goes on, their fundraising efforts around it are going to continue. And I think at this point, they're just trying to stretch it out because they're continuing to raise undisclosed amounts of money from this.
Our next question.
I would just remind everyone that the Senate is raising these private funds that, again, as the Secretary noted, we will not have insight into just weeks after they prohibited election officials from accepting private funds to pay to help offset costs for election administration.
Our next question is from Zach at Politico. Zach, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, folks, can you hear me? There we go. Thanks all for doing this. I have a question, I think, for Secretary Hobbs, but maybe broadly for the panel, sort of related to the audit, I guess. We've seen that some proponents of the audit are considering running for election administration positions in the state. And broadly, we've seen that elected officials and politicians are running for election administration jobs who haven't accepted the results of the 2020 election. Is there a particular danger to that, both in Arizona, that proponents of the audit are looking to run elections in the future and broadly?
I definitely have thoughts about that, but if anyone else wants to jump in first, I will. Okay. So, I think one of the things in our country is that a lot of election administrators are partisan elected positions. And, there's not any laws in Arizona, I don't know about other states, where I have to remain neutral. But as someone who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Arizona and the country, and as the chief election officer of the state, I have tried very hard to remain above the political fray, to be as nonpartisan as possible, to not even have the perception that I am putting my thumb on the scale somehow. I took a public pledge that I wasn't going to endorse any candidates as the Secretary of State, that I wasn't going to endorse or oppose any ballot measures, because our office has a hand in all of those things. And I just think the perception is bad. Now, predecessors of mine have not taken that same oath. Current Senate liaison for the audit, Ken Bennett, when he was Secretary of State, he chased down Obama's birth certificate conspiracy. He led the charge on that here in Arizona. I think lost a lot of credibility for doing that. And he also was Mitt Romney's campaign chair here in Arizona. I think those things are all problematic. And as the chief election officer of the state, and I would hope every election official in the country who is elected as a partisan would take this as seriously, our focus should be on the process, not the outcome. And once we start mixing those things up, it is dangerous to the process and to our democracy.
Great. Our next question is from Jerod MacDonald at the Arizona Mirror. Jerod, let me find you to unmute you. Jerod, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for taking questions from us today. My question is both, first question is to Jennifer, and then I have another question to Ryan. First is, Jennifer, you said that some of these procedures are changing when you were there. You saw them changing every day. Can you maybe elaborate on some of these procedures that you saw changing every day? And my other question that would be to Ryan is, you said that you saw this Wi-Fi capable router that was hooked up to servers. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that Wi-Fi capable router that you saw that was hooked up to those servers, what the response was when that was brought up, and what are the issues about that brought up, and why that would be an issue for those servers and in general for the audit.
Yeah, so I'll just start by focusing on the forensic paper audit. We saw that initially begin with UV lights. We didn't see any clear indication of how they were flagging ballots. Then a few days in, they developed a key for that. There were 5 categories where ballots that they deemed were suspicious or anomalous fell into one of those categories. They were flagged and they were set aside in the pile. They were also logged. And then fast forward, I got a call just a couple of days ago from a reporter who talked to Ken Bennett about those 5 categories that they were sort of flagging, these anomalous or suspicious ballots. And at that point in time, he was told that's no longer a process that's happening. So it seems really unclear. Every day we sort of see little variations. We certainly saw that with the way they were tallying those ballots. Initially they were sticking closer to piles. I'm not going to call them batches, because in election administration that indicates a lot of thought and organization, but piles of 100 ballots, then they'd shift to 50. We saw some in 60. So there just was this lack of consistency, both in the way they were explaining those procedures as well as what we were seeing day to day.
Yeah, and I saw similar things. I mean, from the way that they were having their technology hooked up at the beginning, everything was being saved locally on computers. After we called out the router issue and had some additional conversations with them, they networked everything on an internal network so that everything was being saved on the server so that they had backups, and so on and so forth. So I definitely saw a constant change as well, and actually heard a lot of the counters saying that those that have been there the longest are the ones that are making the most mistakes because the procedures are changing every single day. And so the new people just see it as the procedure that they're being taught. But those that have been there a long time are hearing something different every single day. But in terms of the router itself, we saw something sitting on top of the box, on top of the cage, that said Netgear. And so couldn't really see it. So we asked if we could point a flashlight at it or have somebody pull it out. And they told us it was a Wi-Fi capable router, but all the Wi-Fi was turned off. They immediately recognized that from an optics standpoint, that it was a very bad situation. And they told us that they would have it changed by the next day. That ended up not being the case. They said they didn't want to make any edits or changes right away, but they would when they come back. They're actually going to take the Wi-Fi router out and use a firewall instead. And so, they have constantly walked around with radio frequency testers to show that it is turned off. But as we had explained, is anybody in the room who has access and an admin password can turn that on and off at any given point. And so, we're being told all the time that it has been disconnected, but we have no proof. And we have no way to determine whether or not they are actually turning that router off when somebody is walking by to detect that it is turned off, and then turning it back on when they walk away.
Our next question is from Alexa Kors from the Wall Street Journal. Alexa, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, for the observers who've been there, can you all just elaborate on how, what you've seen is different from standard audits that you've seen in the past?
Yeah, so really it's simple. First, you may take an audit may look at how the jurisdiction operated in contrast to what the laws and policies were. So did they follow the laws, rules, and regulations of their state and jurisdiction? And then second, when we want to take a look at did the voting equipment operate the way that it was intended, we don't just recount all of the ballots. Each state is slightly different in terms of the method, but we normally take some sort of sample of the ballots and we do a very sort of methodical tally or review or comparison of those ballots against information from the voting system to reach a determination of whether it operated correctly. If there are discrepancies, then states do have mechanisms to escalate that audit. So Arizona is a really great example of that, where if discrepancies in that original hand count audit that Maricopa did were found, they would have escalated that to a larger sample size. But what's happening here just not only does it not look like what we would find in an audit, but essentially as far as the hand count portion goes, and Ryan can talk more about the forensic audit, and Liz I know has some thoughts, they've just decided to recount by hand all 2.1 million ballots, and that's problematic for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, I would just say, to add on to everything and agree to everything that Jennifer said, right? In addition to the basics, right? Professional post-election audits have procedures that are publicly available, that are conducted by election officials across the country. Professional post-election audits allow nonpartisan observers and the press to access the procedure. They're, in addition, down to everything that Jennifer was talking about from beginning and what we assume will be the end. This is not a professional election auditing endeavor, and again, the goal here is not to do anything other than undermine confidence in our elections because they don't like the outcome.
Yeah, and the only thing that I'll add just quickly on the kind of forensics side is typically, as Maricopa County had already done, is a forensic audit is going to be conducted by an accredited voting system testing laboratory or a laboratory that has some sort of accreditations around testing elections. And so Maricopa County already had SLI Global and ProVNV come in and take a look at the systems and determine that everything was accurate, everything was correct, the systems were untampered with and had never been connected to the internet. And so that is what a typical forensic audit would, how a forensic audit would take place. You wouldn't just take a copy of the hard drive and then take it to some warehouse somewhere, unbeknownst to everybody, and start looking at things that you don't have expertise in, and then making claims such as databases that have been deleted that have now been walked back in the Senate hearing yesterday to identify that actually they were there.
Thank you. Our next question is from Bud Foster. Bud, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is for Secretary Hobbs. I watched the meeting yesterday that Senator Fan held in one of the Senate hearing rooms yesterday. And then I talked to some Democrats afterwards who had attended that meeting. They were asked to leave. I suppose you might say they were kicked out. Does that concern you? And if so, how so?
I was muted. Yes, I am concerned that duly elected members of the Senate were not allowed to be in the hearing or whatever it was that we saw yesterday. And yeah, I'm very concerned about that. But of all of my concerns about this entire process, that's probably lower on the list. Yeah, this obviously there's lots of concerns. I don't understand what the purpose of that hearing or whatever it was yesterday was, other than to try to bolster their position. And I don't know the reason that they would want to, I guess that answers the question of why they would want to leave critics out of the room.
Well, I have a follow-up to that. They were using a Senate hearing room, and it gave it a look of credibility. Does that concern you as well? Because the optics are certainly very, very important here.
Well, they're using the resources of the Senate to conduct this entire exercise. They're using the Senate subpoena power, which a judge upheld in court as valid to do this. And so, I mean, I see where you're going. It does kind of look like they're using state resources to fundraise for the Republican Party here in Arizona, but they have done all of this and permitted to do all of this under the guise of the state Senate.
Thank you. Our next question goes to Kaylee Rogers from 538. Kaylee, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much. I was curious, as far as the forensic audit is going, if any of the techniques or ways that they're going about that are sort of standard protocols that we would see would hold up in court. I'm curious how they're going about that aspect of it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that. So on the paper examination portion of the forensic audit, that's the only part that we actually have any transparency on, because I have never seen anything like it. The original holding up the UV lights and then looking at specific folds in the ballot, taking pictures of all of the different ovals. That is something that is completely unprecedented. I've never seen, never heard. And then in terms of the machine examination, as I had just alluded to, a typical machine audit happens by a voting system testing laboratory or an accredited laboratory who has a knowledge of the systems, who has a knowledge of the software, not what is being conducted. But as for how they are conducting it, what they are doing, there's very little transparency. As I said, they took copies of the databases and shipped them off somewhere. It's not happening on the floor of the Coliseum. It is not happening, to my knowledge, anywhere inside of the Coliseum. It is happening somewhere in a laboratory somewhere, and not on the equipment. It is on copies of the equipment that they had, or images of the equipment that they had taken to ship off somewhere else.
Our next question is from Mark Phillips at ABC 15. Mark, go ahead and ask your question. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, we can.
Okay. This is for Secretary Hobbs. You know, this is the second time we've listened to you guys, and the level of your distrust, you know, is palpable. And so I just want to, is there a point that this level of distrust over the competence of the auditors prompts you to try to stop the audit in federal court, or take some means to try to stop it?
So, I mean, I think I've had concerns from the beginning that we were going to be at this place potentially. I mean, it became clear when the Senate originally issued the subpoena back in December, after a day long of testimony from Maricopa County election officials answering questions about the process. And then they issued this subpoena, which it seemed very clear from the beginning that this was part of a political agenda. Once the subpoena was issued, Maricopa County tried to work with them in good faith to address their concerns. And when that wasn't successful, it became clear that, again, this is part of a political agenda. They're not going to listen to the facts about any of this. And then when the subpoena was upheld in court and it was clear that the Senate had no plan to actually follow through with any of this, and they've been making it up as they've gone along since, I really, we're continuing to consider our legal options. Maricopa County is really the entity with the most legal standing in this situation because it's their equipment and their ballots. And they're the ones that are the subject of the subpoena. And so, you know, we're continuing to explore and exercise the legal options that we have. But I think the ability to shut this down in court is probably very limited.
All right, we have time for, one more question. I do see that we have a question from Ryan at Arizona Public Radio. Ryan, let me find you so that I can unmute you. All right, Ryan, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks everybody for doing this. This is for Secretary Hobbs, but could be for the panel in general, I guess. You mentioned your concerns about this type of audit expanding to other states, but are you worried similar Senate audits could be conducted in other Arizona counties, for instance, here in Coconino?
Well, certainly there's been allusion to the fact that they might expand the scope of the audit to other counties or expand it to other races on the ballot. I think that goes right in line with the opportunities that they're seeing to continue to fundraise off of this effort. So yes, I do have concerns that it will expand.
And also, just in terms of a follow-up, do you see this audit as in any way linked to recent bills signed into law in Arizona affecting Arizona's early ballot list and ballot signatures?
I think everything that we've seen related to the election or election law since November 4th of 2020 is all connected to the big lie, to continuing to undermine voters' confidence in the system and using that to justify making it harder for folks to participate.
I see that we have a hand raised from Travis Waldron. Travis, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I'm sorry. I missed the first part of the call, but I know you all have been skeptical of this from the get-go, but has it gone even worse, or have the processes that you've observed in person been even worse than you expected?
I think I'll go first. I think it's hard to answer that because, as Secretary Hobbs has said multiple times, we traditionally see audits, recounts, that sort of thing done under overseen by election officials who understand the laws, rules, regulations. They do this fully transparent, open to the public. So I think we were skeptical to begin with, and the alarms just continue to raise as we saw what might seem like a small thing, like not having anybody validating the data that was being put in, or this turntable thing. Like it's really hard to get your head around how bizarre that is, to see ballots just spinning around on colored tables and people expecting to quickly write down what they see for two different races. So I don't know if that answers your question. Has it gotten worse? It was pretty bad to begin with, and then we just see this continual sort of shifting of what they're doing, what they're looking at, what is being used, what isn't. We saw the big monitors showing the ballot on the first few days. Those disappeared. I mean, it's just really hard to put your finger on how poorly managed this is, and just how bizarre this is, but also what a horrible precedent is being set by allowing this to continue.
Yeah, and I'll quickly say that, I was very skeptical when I first found out about it. When they were first talking about having Allied Security Operations Group come in and conduct the audit, after, being the one who had to rebut the Antrim County report over the forensic audit there, and then finding out that it was not going to be ASOG, but rather it was going to be Cyber Ninjas coming in, who also participated in the Antrim County report. And so I was already skeptical just knowing how poor that quote unquote forensic audit was, and the way that the report was written. And so I came in with a lot of skepticism, and I would say that this has stood up to that skepticism. As Jennifer had stated, it's hard to put your finger on and say, has it gotten worse? What I can say is it has constantly changed, and it has never gotten better. Whether or not it has gotten worse is kind of hard to make a determination, though.
Thank you all so much. Before we wrap, I just want to say that if you have any follow-up questions or need a recording of today's call, please email me at gabby.richards@berlinrosen.com. Joanna, I'll kick it back over to you.
Thanks, Gabby. Thank you all so much for being with us. I just want to touch on 2 points based on the questions we heard today. First, to the question you asked, Ryan, from Arizona Public Radio, I want to emphasize that we're concerned not just about this spreading to other counties in Arizona, but it's spreading to other states and counties across the country. And I think that's why you see people speaking out, not just at the state and local level, but nationally, bipartisan leaders across the country really raising their voices against this, the impact that it has on our democracy. It's embarrassing. It's disrespectful, and it's disrespectful in particular to, the more than 2 million voters in Arizona who are having their ballots treated in this way. So thank you so much to this incredible group of observers whose expertise really shows us what a sham this is. We'll continue to try to give you all a forum to be able to hear from them. And I want to thank Secretary Hobbs in particular for her incredible leadership and her commitment to free and secure elections, and again to the bipartisan leaders across the country who've spoken out and will continue, I know, to speak out against this, and of course to you guys for covering this important issue. So thank you for joining us, and questions to Gabby in the chat. Thanks so much.